anybody hear the bell outside? Anyway, I think we can slowly start, and if somebody else will join us, they're welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. After lunch, it's always a tough panel. I understand that, especially when there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lawyers sitting in front of you. However, I must tell you, some of us, or my colleagues here, are fun lawyers, all right? So we're not so strict as if we were like banking lawyers or something else. So we're going to try to keep this light after lunch discussion, interactive, which means you're absolutely encouraged to comment, to ask questions. We have a very broad topic, emerging markets, do's and don'ts. We can talk about anything pretty much. But of course, with the experience we have from our panelists, we're going to focus on the experience from mature markets when we talk about the do's and don'ts of the gaming industry. We had an interesting workshop. Our colleagues were there just about an hour ago before lunch on the so-called European Digital Decade, something that the European Commission is forcing very much. You know, the old saying, as I said, Americans innovate, Chinese duplicate, and Europeans regulate, right? So we were talking about that third part, the regulation, and of course the upcoming potential deregulation, as it was announced by the Commission that probably we will have to follow some deregulation tendencies or trends from the United States. Before we continue and before I introduce our distinguished panelists, just a few words. I'm Jaka from Slovenia. Hi, Zoltan. Did you ring the bell? All right. Simon was just asking me before, what is the Slovenian Advertising Tribunal? So just a few words. So what is that? So we have a tribunal which is competent for the entire country to decide on the legality and ethical issues of advertising. So we have the competence under law and under our statute to remove advertising that is harmful or illegal or unethical. And that's quite, you can imagine, that's quite an interesting job. And we cover all the media, television, internet, everything, newspapers, billboards. So it's almost like a full-time job for me, but I'm also a lawyer in the media and gaming sector. But enough about me. Let me just read or say a few words from the organizer about the general topic of our conversation today. So as online gambling continues to expand globally, emerging markets present both lucrative opportunities and significant regulatory challenge. So our IMGL Masterclass will explore the regulatory landscape in emerging markets, and of course, before we start, we'll define the emerging markets as we see it, and developing jurisdictions. We will share our expertise from our distinguished panelists, on navigating licensing requirements, compliance pitfalls, responsible gambling obligations, and market entry strategies. So the do's and don'ts of an emerging market and what we can learn from so-called mature markets. Let me introduce our distinguished panelists, and of course we're going to start with ladies. Dr. Alexandra Körner is a lawyer and has particular expertise in compliance issues relating to national and international gambling law. Before joining the management of Stadtcasino Baden AG in 2020, she was a lawyer at MME Legal AG, specializing in Swiss and international gaming and gambling law. Alexandra is responsible for all legal matters within the group. She also leads the teams in the areas of responsible gaming, AML and fraud prevention and security. She is also a board member of the SRO Casinos, an organization focusing on anti-money laundering, regulation, and procedures. Welcome, Alexandra, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Ala Cerebrianskiaya is a partner at Asensi Abogados in Spain, a Spanish law firm specializing in the gaming and gambling sector. Since joining about 13, 14 years ago, she has played a key role in Spanish online gambling licensing processes, advising major international operators on licensing, regulatory compliance, and operational matters. Asensi Abogados also has offices in Colombia, where Ala assisted with drafting the online gambling regulation back in 2015. She's a member of IMGL and IAGA and frequently writes and speaks on Spanish gambling law. Welcome, Ala. On my left, we all know him very well, Dr. Simon Pflanzer has been presenting at our conference here in Prague since it kicked off its first edition. He's a veteran in Prague. He's the founder.
That's another word for old, right?
He's the founder of the gaming law boutique law firm Pflanzer Law that has supported the leading B2Cs and B2Bs in their global business development and advised on complex multi-jurisdictional deals. Simon also teaches European law at the excellent University of St. Gallen in Switzerland and wrote his PhD on European gaming law. He serves on the executive committee of IMGL and is editor-in-chief of our IMGL magazine. Simon, thank you for being with us. And last but not least, Dr. Jörg Hoffmann. Now, when I asked Jörg to put a few words about him, presentation, he sent me one sentence. I'm a gaming lawyer from Germany who have been advising the gaming industry for 30 years now. So Jörg, please, let me add a few words to your one-sentence introduction. Jörg is also the past president of IMGL. He's not only one of the finest legal minds in gaming worldwide, but also a great mentor to his younger colleagues at Melchers and a wonderful companion at seminars and conferences. But above all, a really experienced gaming lawyer, and we're really happy to have you here with us today, Jörg. So welcome to our distinguished panelists, and we're going to kick off with our debate on the topic, how to get it right in the emerging markets. Now, Simon, before I ask every one of you about the definition of emerging markets, I ask that definition also to ChatGPT, by the way. There's all sorts of definitions popping up if you ask this, but let me just put a few sentences of how I believe emerging markets could be defined. In the gambling industry, emerging markets are jurisdictions where online or land-based gambling is experiencing regulatory evolution and increasing operator interest. These markets often present new licensing frameworks, evolving compliance requirements, and significant business potential, but also come with risks such as regulatory uncertainty, political instability, and economic challenges. Before we start, I forgot one more thing, and please, Jörg, can you just in few words tell us about IMGL Masterclass project, which we have here in Prague every single year. It's an interesting project at IMGL. In a few sentences, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Aka. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. I'll try to keep it short. You probably know IMGL stands for International Masters of Gaming Law. This is a non-profit association which is globally. We have more than 300 members in 43 countries plus 34 states and territories in the US. It's almost everywhere in the world, in Asia, Australia, Africa, Europe, and name it. And probably if there is jurisdiction which is regulated, you find IMGL members. The IMGL Masterclass is a special format which we introduced some years ago as a format that fosters one of our core missions to support the development, the communication, and the collaboration in various gambling sectors. We are focusing on special, very timely topics, and we bring this to existing conferences. Not to all conferences in the world, but only those who meet the IMGL requirements, the top-level conferences. And so you can expect, and we can expect, that we are leading discussions on a very high level. IMGL used to be an association of gaming lawyers, founded in 2001 in America. Where else? Now the head office is based in Las Vegas. In the meantime, it's not only lawyers, gaming lawyers as members, it's also advisors, C-level people from industry, and so on. And so far, we have a wonderful crowd of people who understand gaming and to lead this discussion in how can we do things better, and how can we be on top of what everybody knows comes next. Hopefully today, because it's emerging jurisdictions, we can find out where we are going to. Emerging, to me, to answer your question, means whenever a regulation, whenever a jurisdiction starts to regulate gaming. And regulate gaming means, to me, to license, to introduce a licensing regime for a private market, not only monopolies. Monopolies is, of course, is regulation too. But coming from a dot-com country and being transitioned into a license regime. That's what I call emerging jurisdiction. And this could be a big one or a small one, it doesn't matter, it's the same. Since we always have the same issues, the same do's, and many, many don'ts, we can share these insights and try to avoid things and make the process faster of enhancing gaming regulation worldwide. I hope this does it.
Jörg, this is perfect. Thank you so very much. But I have to say, or maybe put a little bit of a provocative question, is Germany an emerging jurisdiction?
Unfortunately, it still is, and many of you know, we come from a monopoly system. We come from a culture where regulators, and in particular politicians, combated the existing online gaming industry. And some years ago, only some years ago, which exactly is 2020, we got a new regulation, Gaming Interstate Treaty on Gaming, introducing first licenses for sports betting. 1.5 years later for online casino, which you cannot call online casino, you have to call it virtual slot machine. Online casino is something different, goes too much into details. So we're still developing. And I will share some insights where I think we can learn from Germany how to make things better. And that's quite a lot.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll come back to that. Simon, the definition of emerging markets. You've seen mine helped a little bit with artificial intelligence. You've seen Jörg's with his natural intelligence. And now yours, please.
Thank you. Yeah, in a nutshell, we typically refer to emerging markets as a jurisdiction newly regulated or that has just gone through overhaul, so significant change of regulation, be it in the land-based, be it in the online. Yeah. As such, it doesn't say something yet about the economic attractiveness of the jurisdiction, but just about the fact of new regulation coming in.
Before we continue, Alan and Alexandra, just a few examples of emerging markets, countries. I mean, to put Germany aside and that, which ones would you point out? Simon, Jörg, and then Alan and Alexandra, just an example of an emerging market in your point of view.
Current emerging, well, I have an example of Colombia, for example, which is still an emerging market, and where, as you said, we participated in the online gambling regulation for Colombia. Peru is an emerging market going to the other parts of the world, right, to the other continent. Here, in Latin America, we also have Brazil. In Europe, we have Hungary, Romania, right? In Spain is not an emerging market anymore. We regulated back in 2011, although we have Ceuta and Melilla, which are new gambling-friendly jurisdictions with a special tax regime. So we can consider those also emerging territories.
Slovenia is a super developed market in land-based, right? So it's not an emerging market since 1968 in land-based, but it's an emerging market in online since 2006, and it's still emerging, right? So we're waiting for this law. So you can be emerging also in different ways. But Switzerland, 5 years ago, you were an emerging market by all definitions. Alexandra, how would you put this definition in your perspective?
Yeah, that is true. I mean, Switzerland was an emerging market 5 years ago for the online. We already had land-based casinos a long time before, but for the online, it was emerging. I'd say it's still a little emerging, but then in Europe, you have other markets like Finland. Also, France could be an emerging market, depending on the definition. Then, of course, you have the South Asian market, which is emerging, Africa, so they're pretty much emerging markets everywhere in the world, I'd say.
Thank you so much. Now, Simon, we go straight to the point. So the do's and don'ts for the emerging markets based on our experience, based on what we can call experience from mature markets. This is a question for all four of you, and you can really elaborate on this one in more extended way because this is the core of our discussion. So the do's and don'ts that you would suggest today as a high-profile lawyer or consultant to an emerging market. Let's start with you, please.
Thanks. So there are two perspectives maybe to this question. One is the do's and don'ts for regulators and legislators, and then we can also take the business side, right? Both. So things that are going wrong from the business side. Let me start maybe from the stateside legislators and regulators. And I think we can, in many jurisdictions, observe the following. When the legislator is legislating on gaming, they often have the very same thing in mind, no matter which country, and that is generalization, right? And the background of that big notion is we want to make sure we can grab the majority of the offer and get that money into public purse. So generalization usually is the big buzzword that you find in any process of legislation. So far, so good. So we want to legislate, grab the money, channel the offer into our nationally regulated channels. So this is the goal. So far, so good. And then the mistakes kick in. And I think they're done in similar ways, in similar places or different places. One big mistake is to raise taxes too high. And as we know, I mean, businesses, they need to be economically viable. And one example is the Netherlands that has raised taxation, and the market is already reacting. So by raising the taxation significantly, there is a significant risk. Any legislator must be aware of this, to actually then push the market towards the unregulated or the consumers. Then another one is fine as brutally and high as you can your licensees. That's another classic one. And why doing that? It's easier than going after the unlicensed offer. So you just go after the domestic offer and find them as high as you can. And finally, one other trend that we can see are advertising restrictions and advertising bans. So that makes it even more difficult for the licensed offer to actually then communicate to the users and bring their offer forward. And I do believe that many of these mistakes are being done fundamentally by forgetting the most important stakeholder in the game. And that most important stakeholder are the users, the players. So it's like legislating in a vacuum, assuming that you can just legislate as you please and everybody will follow. But that's not the reality, because the users are then voting by their mouse clicks. So at least in the online. In the land-based, it's a little bit different. But in the online, users can very much vote by their mouse clicks, unless you go after them by means of criminal law. So usually similar starting point, and then similar mistakes are being done.
Why do you think, just to elaborate a little bit on the same mistakes are done? Why is this copy-pasting of mistakes, just like copy-pasting of regulation between jurisdictions that are really not so similar as you think they are? Why is this such a big trend, and why haven't we learned from the past mistakes here? What would you say the reason behind that is?
I do believe that, sometimes the legislator implements these measures, other times the regulator. So we have to be fair to regulators. It's often actually legislators who introduce these measures against the will of the regulator. So as is the case, for instance, regarding taxation in the Netherlands, that was not something stemming from the regulator, KSA, but something that was introduced by the legislator. So I think the background is, one, this illusion to being able to squeeze the lemon more and more. I mean, many European countries have severe deficit problems, and that is not just the case for one or two. So they're also under the supervision of the European Commission, and they're looking desperately for means of income, more revenues.
When member states, thank you so much. Before we go to you guys, I just wanted one more comment on that. When member states in the European Union don't know how to regulate or legislate a specific field of industry, services, whatever, finance, we harmonize on the European level. So we make regulations and directives. With harmonization to a certain extent, I know it's a huge cultural, political, fiscal issue, but would a certain approach towards harmonization be then easier to prevent the mistakes we're making by just copy-pasting national legislations, so to have sort of an umbrella similar to the EU directives and regulations. Just a short comment.
You refer to harmonization of gaming
Yeah,
regulations?
regulations to a certain extent, not the fiscal ones. I know the countries will never let that, but to a certain extent, would that be an answer to a certain dilemma?
Well, it has been attempted. The industry has tried it in the light of the many cases before the Court of Justice of the EU, including very prominent cases relating to Germany, right? But the political will has never been there to hand away that national privilege, so to say. And would it solve it? I mean, there is some harmonization on the technical level, and you take standards from GLI and other testing houses. There's a great deal of harmonization on the technical side, I would actually argue. But on the regulation side, we heard it today, I think, on the panel regarding Finland, who commented on this. There are funny differences, from one country to another. In one, you can have only welcome bonuses, but not afterwards any bonuses. In other countries, you can't have welcome bonuses, but any other form afterwards. Would it solve it? I'm not sure. And one comment, if you allow, if the EU ever moves towards harmonizing taxation, actually, good luck.
No, they're not going to. But it's not because of gaming. I think this is a great lead into your question. I mean, harmonization is almost impossible on the EU level, set aside the global one. But it's even a big problem within federal states in Germany to a certain extent. I mean, it was. It's a challenge even within a country that's federal like Germany to talk about some sort of a harmonization. So just a quick comment on that issue, but then go back to the original question of the do's and don'ts, also, of course, from the experience of Germany. Please.
Right. I mean, harmonization just within the country. We have 16 states, so-called Länder in Germany. And the legal competence lies with the Länder parliaments. So 16 prime ministers, 16 parliaments, that was the past. In order to find something which we could call harmonized, the prime minister signed an interstate treaty, which sounds good because this is applicable across the whole country. In Germany, so if you get a license in Germany, you can offer, based on this license, your offerings to every German player in Germany. It doesn't matter whether in Bavaria or further up in the north in Hamburg. The idea is great. The downside is the authority, the regulator, GGL, stands for Joint Gambling Supervisory Authority, Gemeinsame Glücksspielbehörde der Länder, that's why GGL. This is an authority based on the interstate treaty, meaning the political power of all lenders want to have a say. And this is a political power. They don't have a clue. This is my opinion. Political movements are going into the wrong direction here, and it's like a break. This authority cannot really make its own decisions like a federal authority would do. That's one of the main issues we are facing in Germany. The process of decision-making is very slow, and the results is sometimes simply stupid, because even if the regulator would like to say yes, sometimes he's instructed by a so-called board of directors or board of administrative representatives from the states to say no. That's why things are a little bit different. But to answer your main question, do's and don'ts, I think it's a very easy one to start with the do. The do is just keep the balance of regulation, keep it right. Because if the balance is wrong, then it's over-regulated or under-regulated. And there are two key factors. And the key factors, they decide on, and they show if the channelization rate is high or low. If it's high, we could call it a successful regulation. If it's low, then the black market operators are celebrating, like they are in Germany. And the two key factors for the success is product and taxation. And so far I concur with Simon. If the product is not competitive against the black market operators, meaning the player decides, I play outside, then the best player protection regime is going to fail. It doesn't reach the player. We may have academic, superb concepts in place, and it sounds really nice. But this includes, of course, restrictions. Talking about advertising, talking about bonuses. We have a limited spin duration, which is 5 seconds on average per slot machine game. The standard player accepts 3 seconds on average. 5 is just too long for him. When we introduced this years ago in Schleswig-Holstein, there was a standalone model years ago, which is more than 10 years ago. Overnight, 50% of the players went out to black market operators. Same with stake limits, deposit limits. It sounds so protective, but it isn't, because if the player wants to stake more or to deposit more, he can do so outside with black market operators. That's for the product side. Taxation, Germany had this great idea to change the taxation base, coming from gross gaming revenues to stakes for sports betting, for virtual slot machines, and the tax rate is around 5%. The effective tax is 5.01 or 3, I guess, and this is way too high. The answer to the question, how could we be competitive, wasn't answered by the regulators, but by the Ministry of Finance, saying you can reduce your RTP, your return to players, so you can make money and be profitable. The question was, okay, we could be profitable, but nobody will play with us. We're not competitive because black market operators have a better RTP than we have. The answer was, that's not our cup of tea. We are here with taxes. You can talk to your regulator, and the regulator can shook his head and said, no way. And that's why we see in the virtual slot machine games a huge black market. My personal take is we're talking about 70 or 80%. Politicians wouldn't confirm. There are numbers which are always conflicting, of course, but we know the suppliers, we know the operators, we know what they had in the past, we know what they have now, and what they are complaining. And we also know, just because we know many people in other jurisdictions, how successful the business is for unlicensed operators. That's why the don't is don't overregulate. Everything else is fine. Then we can talk about player protection, which works. But if the regulation goes beyond what is accepted by players, there's no way to be successful.
Thank you, Jörg. Alexandra, if you can continue with the do's and don'ts, and maybe also a little bit more from the business perspective. And you're entering different markets, and you told me when we were preparing for the panel that there are just some things that you have on a checklist in a jurisdiction that you just say, no, we're not going to go there. So maybe a little bit more on those issues as well. But of course, on the general question, please.
Yeah, maybe coming back to your question, why we always make the same mistakes in all the emerging or also mature markets. Why don't we learn? I think one of the reasons might be that legislators don't know the industry. And the one mistake is they don't talk to the industry, so they could learn. That's why they're just looking to other countries, what are they doing, not really understanding what are the consequences of some regulations, and then just doing the same mistakes again. That happened in Switzerland, that happens in Germany, so we can see it all over all the time. And from the operator perspective or from a casino perspective, wanted to enter a new market, there are some regulations we always see, or we see very often, which we consider very carefully. One is, of course, advertisement restrictions. What does it mean to have a ban on influencer marketing? What does it mean to have a ban on affiliation marketing? If you as an operator are used to these marketing techniques and then you enter a market with a prohibition of that, it's really difficult to anticipate the consequences, and how can I then, or I have to find new strategies to acquire new players and to keep them, of course. And this comes with a lot of costs in the end. So in the end, it's always a cost question. Advertisement is one big thing where we always have a very close look on.
Can you just maybe also give us a few examples of the recent jurisdictions that you were elaborating, and then you said, okay, not only advertising, but some other don'ts or some other things that it's just like a red light for you guys. You know, we're not going to go there until they learn something and change it to a better, climate for you to enter, because you're a big player in the market, so it's important for you.
Yes, one aspect where we always have a close look on is not really based on the regulation, but it's the culture in the market. So we, very early in the beginning, we ask ourselves, does our product fit the market, or do we have to change a lot to make it good for the market? Do people in the market like our product or not? If the changes we have to make are too big, then it's again too costly, and we will not enter that market. That specifically applies to games but also to the platform, to the technical underlyment we have. So what we learned is that if you have a platform which is scalable, adaptable to different jurisdictions, that helps a lot, because you're just faster and it's less costly to enter a new market. Maybe coming back to your question of the absolute no-goes, that's also sometimes related to the cultural aspects. For a Swiss company going to foreign markets, it's important to adhere to AML legislation. So if AML is a problem in a market, that can then fall back on us as a group, and that could be a reason why we don't enter a market if AML situation is not good in that market.
The bigger, the more publicly traded, the less likely a company will go into a market that's maybe a little bit, let's say, problematic in that sense. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I understand. Last but not least, of course, it's a broad question, do's and don'ts, and you have extended experience, Spain, South America. Maybe give us a little bit of perspective also from the South American emerging markets, as well as your experience in Spain, and please.
So I totally agree with the comments made by my colleagues, and I would like to add one more aspect that I believe it's very important, and it's the education, the lack of information. Complementing a little bit what you said, Alexandra, about the lack of collaboration and the communication, there is a lack of information, no education. Well, education from the first step, education from the first moment is a tool for legitimacy. Educating the society, educating people. When there is a match-fixing scandal on news, people doesn't understand that the match-fixing scandal, that the operator is very affected by a match-fixing scandal. People doesn't understand that gambling becomes detrimental when it becomes an addiction. This may happen and may not. Until or unless this happens, gambling is entertainment. And education, it's a structural component for effective regulation, especially in a market like it is the gambling industry. So I believe the lobbying, what operators are doing from the very beginning is not enough. It's an industry which represents millions and millions, and the campaigns, the awareness campaigns, the public education campaigns are not enough. There is a need for that, and I believe that when the industry reacts, it's already late. The industry reacts when there is almost a ban on advertising. There is a very big social pressure, movements from populist political parties. There is a big opposition against gambling, and I would say that one of the reasons is precisely because there is a lack of information. And we see that not only in the society, not only in the domino effect from one country to another, but we see that also, unfortunately, in the court decisions. Like the cases that we have from fraudulent players, for example, judges cannot understand that there are players that use sophisticated systems and bots to cheat the operator system. Judges from not Barcelona, Madrid, but maybe from some villages in Spain, they don't understand that this can happen because the only one who can cheat is the casino, who can cheat the player, and the casino is the bad one, not the player. And we have a very big problem in Spain, for example, with fraudulent players. And to give you a few examples about court decisions, for example, we had a case where there is a driver of an train engine driver, and his account was blocked by an operator because it was a fraudulent behavior. The driver was making more than 230 bets in less than 10 hours, more than 14,000 bets in less than 6 months, multiple bets on the very exact time, and the court decision said that this behavior is not enough to consider it as fraudulent, and that these specific signs are not expressly set forth in the regulation as fraudulent. Another example, for example, players who are employed are placing bets in a mechanic way every 8 seconds during several days. Every 8 seconds during several days, more than 500 bets a day. Again, the court decision was, we don't have enough evidences that this is a fraudulent behavior, fraudulent player, and signs like this are not set forth in the regulation as fraudulent. So there is a clear lack of even understanding, misconcepts, even for the judges, for the courts.
Simon, you wanted to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think we're doing the circle. First, we started with the legislator, regulator, what they can do wrong. Then you did mention on the industry briefly, and also the judges, the justice side. So it would appear that the justice system does not have enough knowledge or affinity to that sector. And I could close the circle with the business again. You know, what are the mistakes there? And I think what often happens when a market is newly regulated is that you have the chief strategy officers or the chief business development officers with big eyes seeing these nice large figures that they see that they can gain newly or that they have had in the past in the gray market in this jurisdiction. So these are very nice figures, but sometimes the other side is then forgotten, which is, we are not going to make the same figures probably because it's no longer gray market, it's no longer .com, but it's actually regulated or heavily regulated or over-regulated, as Jörg said. So I think one important thing to do as a homework would actually be to also ask themselves the question, how stable is that regulatory framework even? And what's the likelihood that with a government change in 1 or 2 years, all the calculations we've done are actually nil and void? Because, for instance, an opposing party as the Cinque Stelle movement in Italy, when they came to power, the first thing they did was to ban advertising.
There's an interesting panel in Rome in 2 weeks. Quirino Mancini, former president of IMGL, is gonna have an IMGL Masterclass on this ban on advertising in Italy. I mean, I really want to come back. Thank you so much, Simon. I want to come back a little bit just to elaborate on the advertising, because this seems to be really everybody mentioned this as one of the biggest obstacles, the biggest don'ts when you regulate a market. Why? What's happening? I mean, what's in more details, if you could explain why would they be doing that in Italy? I mean, they're banning advertising on licensed operators, and there's cross-border advertising and, you know, gray market and black market that you cannot actually technically ban. I don't understand. I mean, can somebody help?
I would say because there is a lack of knowledge. Like we have, for example, there is a statistic like interviews that in Spain been made, and 50% of the population doesn't know how to distinguish a legal casino from an illegal one, because they are restricting advertising of legal casinos. So I think that it's basically like one of the biggest mistakes is the lack of education, because we need to make a difference, and the society needs to understand what is the difference between legal and illegal casino. It's an industry that pays taxes, that generates money, that operators need to promote responsible gambling, need to commit themselves and need to show that to the society. And I think that basically the lack of education and also the fact of acting when it's already late, and the strong movements against gambling and the politics and populism, and in some cases even corruption, and it's difficult to fight against that, right? And gambling, it's a politically easy target, and it's more politically correct to prohibit gambling than to have a brave attitude and regulate gambling. But the industry needs to fight against this, and the industry needs to invest money and needs to invest in public awareness campaigns, etc.
It's often tempting for politicians to take this low-hanging fruit. It seems very easy and tempting to say or to concur, yes, this is dangerous, we need to protect consumers, and therefore we need to prohibit advertisement for this dangerous good. Of course, the opposite is true. If you want to generalize the offer, then you should exactly not do that. What is totally legitimate is to restrict certain messages, like dangerous messages such as, take shortcuts in life, gamble instead of working.
That's true. The DSA, we had this on our workshop today, the Digital Services Regulation Act of European Union, for example, bans or it mentions the so-called dark patterns in advertising, also in gaming, in its introductory provisions of DSA. And those are exactly the ones that were actually in many court cases now in European Union. They were problematic as the messaging was problematic. Not the advertisement itself, but the content of the messages were using dark patterns. There's a lot of dark patterns. One of them, for example, would be a very easy one to understand, even it's not gaming related. You go to booking.com and on Monday there's only 2 rooms available at that price. On Tuesday it's already 4 for a lower price, and that's a typical dark pattern of forcing consumers to buy something. And in gaming, the cases we elaborated today at our workshop were when they were losing, they were getting flashy messages for jackpots. So they would put in more and more and more, and that's a prohibited dark pattern under DSA, which is a regulation effective in 27 member states, mostly. And it's a very big issue, like with GDPR, how much of an effect it will have outside of the European Union. But there's always an elephant in the room when we discuss those things about changing regulation and setting examples. And, you know, there's a jurisdiction that has very good, you know, it's a very mature market. They have very clear political and regulatory framework. It's Malta. It's you know, it's an example in so many cases how a country and political system regulation works for the system that's, you know, successful. And I want to touch on that. And I want to touch on Article 56A, a political article in the Gaming Act of Malta, but very important message. I mean, that's, you know, we will protect our market against unlawful decrees from other member states, which we believe are legal in Malta. I mean, this is something we need to address when we're talking about dues, or maybe just talking about political support when it comes to developing an emerging market. Jörg, I'll start with you, and then Simon, and both of you, please, if you can comment on that. That's a very complex issue.
Right. I mean, everybody is familiar with Article 56A of the Maltese Gaming Act, the former Bill 55 as a term, which does prevent from enforcement of foreign court decisions coming from Austria, Germany, maybe the Netherlands, Slovenia, yeah, and probably Sweden in the near future as well, which are based on player claims. So players sue the casino, say, we lost money in times when you were not licensed, but offering your games in our jurisdiction as an illegal operator. For some reasons, they have arguments to say, we can claim our losses back. And German courts, if it's casino games, 90% will be with the player, I would say so. Sports betting is completely different in our country, but it's you have to distinguish. Then if you go to Malta and try to enforce these court decisions, the Maltese courts can say, no, we do not accept it. This is against ordre public, the public interest, and that is based on a Maltese law. There is this Brussels recast, I think, too, which is something similar. Nobody knows this, by the way, sometimes, but it also says in an exceptional case, where an enforcement is against this, what we lawyers call ordre public, you can refuse to accept these enforcement activities. It's pretty much the same. And there's a court case pending in Malta, with the Maltese court not dealing with the Article 56A, but with the Brussels recast as well. So saying this is more a European Union legal aspect. It will be interesting to see how the ECJ is dealing with it, because the Maltese court, it's not surprising, confirmed the legality of this practice. But now, here's the point. This is the MGA. This is the Maltese regulatory regime protecting the business, which is part of responsibility. I wish every regulator would think the same. What does the German regulator? Looks at Bill 55 and then Article 56A and starts to consider whether they have to question the reliability of licensed operators in Germany if they make use of Article 56A and don't pay the players who's now suing them. It's the totally different attitude. It's industry hostile, this sort of attitude. But I understand this because this is an emerging jurisdiction. There's one aspect which applies to every young regulatory system. The regulators, they have to learn something. They start from scratch. we know so much about gaming. Everybody here in this room is here for years and understands developments in various jurisdictions. We are advising or even guiding companies through licensed markets, and we understand every single term. And they start from scratch. They're coming from departments, divisions that have nothing to do with gaming, coming from universities, studying the law, and this is their first job. No idea what gaming means. They cannot even respond to questions. And so they are reluctant. For us, that means we have to be patient. It takes years. And we have to be polite. Don't look down to them. I think even if it's a complicated dialogue, the most important thing I learned is never let them lose their face. They don't want it, and they will never forget it. So it takes time, and this dialogue is another due based on patience to start this dialogue and make sure everybody meets twice. The second meeting will be a final meeting too. It's very important.
Thank you so much. Simon, would you like to elaborate
Briefly,
on that before we also open the panel for questions, please?
I think I want to raise the attention to something that's often actually neglected in this Bill 55 discussion. What is usually mentioned is the stream that, or the logic that it's about European law, Brussels Convention versus national law, Maltese law. But it actually also goes the other way around. Malta argues that these decisions coming from Germany and Austria are actually not compatible with EU law, free movement of services. Hence, you have, again, EU law, in the view from the Maltese perspective, protecting their interests. So you have an interesting circle of EU law, national law, and the other side also using EU law arguments. And as you're correctly said, there's an exception in the Brussels Convention or Lugano Convention called more internationally, that you do not have to follow in all cases national ruling. And, you know, from the Maltese perspective, they make the point the German and Austrian legislation is not compatible with EU law. However, for instance, the highest Austrian court confirmed that it is.
This is a very technical, very ongoing debate. I think every single panel in the future, for now, we're going to have to open this issue. But Article 56, very legally, is also going to be challenged by a lot of new regulation coming up in European Union as well as DSA. Questions or maybe some comments before we go to the very last two questions for our, or one extended question for our panelists, please.
I just want to say York's comment really resonated with me. So Ontario opened up about 3 years ago, and there's an investigation process, and the investigators were retired police officers. So they came with a real bias that they treated everybody as guilty. And we had to really educate them that these are upstanding business people, they operate companies. We have to educate them that they're essentially digital media companies that offer an entertainment product in a heavily regulated space. But a lot of our clients were just shocked and appalled at the culture that was being pressed upon them. And we had to tell them, listen, this is who we're dealing with. We're dealing with retired police officers. So now we're 3 years past, and that culture has really evolved, but it did require us to sort of work with the regulators, work with the investigators. And that was an emerging market about 3 years ago. Now it's a very successful market, a mature market, but it did take time. So that really, I think, is a very on-point comment.
It takes time, and if you imagine another example from Germany, those regulators who are now dealing with licenses and with license operator. Some years ago, the same people were fighting against this industry, and the companies and the brands are the same. Only difference is now they are licensed. So the attitude is subject to a change, hopefully. But this takes time, and this can only work if the experience made in a couple of years comes to the result that, okay, you can trust these people. They're not all bad. Some are, but the majority is fine.
We're almost at the end, so if there's any other comment or question, we'll be happy to take it. Yes, please.
It's a question regarding government in general. Do you think that government supports unconsciously unregulated business because they're not involving themselves into discussions with the industry?
That's an interesting, very delicate question, but yeah, I mean, it's very important. Would anybody want to just, there's probably no straight answer, but
You said unconsciously, right?
Yeah, I mean, because to be honest, I'm from private payments, A2A provider, PSD2, PSD3, so I'm pretty much familiar with the regulations when it comes to Europe at least. So what I'm seeing is I have every week at least 3-4 requests for just to promote and to onboard Anshan, Chenowaki, and the other licenses, of course, in Germany, for example, or Sweden. So I'm seeing that governments are pushing more and more regulations, higher taxes, and that's the reason why I said unconsciously promoting like these black markets. And I'm seeing this more and more. That's the reason why I think that's.
The answer is yes, so simple, because it happens. I wouldn't only say the government, but legislation, politicians, and maybe the governments, sometimes the regulator, although I must admit a regulator can only be as good as the regulation. If there's bad regulation, he has to apply it. So he's not in charge of everything, unless there's leeway for interpretation. But you can see that if the channelization rate is low, so meaning the black market is high, then the black market is supported by a bad regulation, bad politics, and that's something nobody wants to. If you lead this discussion in public with regulators, they tell you, oh, we don't have evidence. You're raising some numbers, and we don't know whether that is okay. We need to do some more research. The industry knows better, and the black industry, again, celebrates. You can drink champagne all day long.
I can absolutely agree to Jörg. I mean, we saw the same thing in Switzerland. What happened when the new law entered into force in 2019? In 2020, the first online casino opened, and shortly after, there was COVID. And during the COVID time, where everybody was sitting at home, we had a massive TV ads running everywhere. So politicians were waking up, seeing ads everywhere for online casinos, which did not exist before in their minds. And then that started a process which now led to a re-evaluation of the law, even if it's only 5 years old. And that can only mean bad for operators usually, regarding restrictions and responsible gaming, etc. And the Swiss Casino Association really is involved in the process, thankfully, and we try to focus or to lead the focus of the legislator to the black market, to this exact problem that you push the players into the black market with even more restrictions on advertisement and whatever. And now, thankfully, this re-evaluation, there is 3 parts of it. They re-evaluate certain games, of course, responsible gaming regulations, but also the black market. And the Casino Association started a study which said that around 40 to 50% is black market in Switzerland. I think it's higher, but it's always difficult to find out. And this study also helped to educate, to point to this black market problem if we push harder and harder to the licensed operators. So we can see that exactly in Switzerland.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Any other question? We're just about at the end. Would you two guys want to also elaborate on or add something to what we just heard?
No, I think what you described is just, it's the reality, and motivations may be the different ones. One, as I said, is low-hanging fruits. It's populism. It's just easy to shoot at it. That is, I think, one factor that has to be counted in politics, right? And the other one is, a lack of awareness. The path to hell is beset by good intentions. So this is often from the left side of the political wing. Good intentions, doing something for the consumer, but not actually factoring in unintended side effects.
The very last, in 1 sentence or 2 sentences, this is the closing one for all the panelists. It's a typical last question. So where do you see the regulatory landscape, or how do you see it evolving in the next 3 to 5 years? More regulated, less regulated, as Jörg suggested, would be a good idea also. In some cases, how do you see it in 3 to 5 years in light of what we were talking today? In a very, very brief answer.
I would say it's better regulated in 5 years. There's AI coming, having some impact. People learn this industry, its representatives, and they really learn what does not work. And if the numbers go down, the revenues and the generalization rate, there's need for a change, and evaluation takes place. So I'm optimistic.
Thank you so much, Alexandra.
I don't see less regulation, actually. I see more regulation for the simple reason that more markets are going to have regulations. But the more regulations we have, the more good examples, the more bad examples we have, and hopefully legislators in countries find a good way or a way to better regulation.
Thank you so much. Simon?
Yeah, my hope lies with regulators in countries that take the liberty not to just copy other countries' mistakes. So I lay some hope to the Finns. I actually also see some good aspects in Switzerland, where they, for instance, didn't just copy advertising bans as one of the countries. So I also see Ontario as a wonderful example, where it was not about let's punish very hard those guys who were in the gray market, but how do we actually get these guys into the license market and make money of them? So yeah, I see positive cases.
Finland, Switzerland, Ontario, last but not least.
Hopefully more well-balanced and proportional regulation and consistent with the actual problem that we have on the table, which in Spain, for example, is a 0.15% of gambling addiction in the register. We actually have the Supreme Court that has voided certain restrictions from the decree on gambling advertising, which was very big news, saying that the restrictions were not proportional in some cases to the enterprise freedom. So this is a very big and positive step for the industry. So hopefully it goes in that direction.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists for a great panel in attendance, and thank you all for being here. So see you at one of the next panels. Thank you so much.